Joining me now are Major Garrett, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Lynda Tran. Major is CBS News chief Washington correspondent. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Lynda is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. Welcome to all of you. Caitlin, let me start with you. You are there on the ground. Any sense as to how Joe Biden has been preparing for tonight?
Right. Well, leading up to this debate, the clips of that interview with Hunter Biden and Good Morning America have been playing over and over in lots of different debate previews. So you can expect that the campaign will be asked about this in some way or another, whether it's through other candidates or through the moderators. But I spoke to the campaign today, and they said that they want to keep the focus on Donald Trump, that they want to use this opportunity to turn it back to the president and say that a campaign advisor told me that they want to show that the president has been abusing his power and get this back to kind of kitchen table issues that matter to voters in this kind of swing state of Ohio, especially in a suburban area like we are now. But the campaign is going to be facing questions and scrutiny. We saw in our CBS News poll that Democratic voters were somewhat satisfied with how Biden has been handling these attacks from the president. We've seen him switch gears a little bit, switch strategy here to talk about this more. And there are going to be these questions given that Hunter Biden interview. The campaign, however, says that they believe Hunter Biden gave a good defense and kind of outlined what they called illegal activity by the president and by Rudy Giuliani.
Well, Lynda, new CBS News polling found that 42% of Americans think President Trump's assertions about Joe Biden, his son, and Ukraine are deserving of further investigation. What does the former vice president have to do tonight, from your perspective, to shrink that number?
I think the former vice president has to be very direct in explaining what's going on here. For those folks who are out in the world and not within the bubble that we all are and thinking about this every single day, they're just getting the top lines, the headlines. And so what they hear from the president from the Rose Garden or from any other place that he happens to be delivering remarks is going to feel really real to them. So this is an opportunity for Joe Biden to both educate voters around the country about why it makes sense for there to be an impeachment inquiry underway, and also to lay to rest any concerns they may have around the optics. And we should be very clear that what we're talking about is optics, because there has not been any evidence of wrongdoing from former Vice President Biden or his son Hunter.
Major, I'm curious. Now that we know and we have seen sort of up close now for the past couple of years, President Trump's sort of style,
yes.
And it's no longer a campaign, he is governing. How do you think that is going to impact the way in which we see these Democratic candidates try to present themselves to voters? Because we know one thing that voters have said is that it is very important to them that the person they choose can beat Donald Trump. So how do you think now that there is knowledge of his style in office that may shape things?
So one thing I want to do before we get into all of that is note the unprecedented nature of this evening on two fronts. One, 12 candidates on stage, which means there are going to be long lulls for certain candidates. Probably even Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders might go through lull periods.
Right.
And if you're someone like Mayor Pete Buttigieg or Michael Bennet, the Democratic senator from Colorado, or Amy Klobuchar, who desperately, all three of them need camera time. They need time to distinguish, define themselves, and make a way into the next debate by getting more polling, rising in the polls and getting more contributions. Tonight is going to be a tough challenge.
Mm-hmm.
The other unprecedented thing about tonight, in Washington, Elaine, there will be some portion of political reporters, devoted political reporters, who will be split screening Game 4 of the National League Championship Series to see if the Washington Nationals sweep the St. Louis Cardinals. That's a big deal.
I've heard there's a game on. Yeah,
yes,
right,
exactly.
Okay.
But to your question about President Trump, he is a known commodity in every way. He is known as a big voice in American politics. And when he says things about Biden or Hunter Biden, somehow, and I know this is a deep frustration for the Biden campaign, they get some measure of traction. And for a while, they were like, these things we're not even going to dignify them with a response.
Right.
We're above that. Well, good luck with that. Staying above the fray with Donald Trump. You can't. That's not an option. You can tell yourself it might be an option, but the practical truth is it's not an option. You have to engage, you have to figure out ways to do it. And the vice president, to Lynda's point, has to explain tonight, yes, these things are not illegal. Are they perfectly acceptable to most Americans? Your son gets on boards, and he said today to ABC, I probably got on some of them because I'm the vice president's son. You better explain to the American people why you're okay with that. And if you can't, that's going to be a long-running problem. If not with Democratic voters in the general election, when fairly or not, legally or not, grounded or not, Donald Trump will say there's a moral equivalency between you and everything I've been accused of or my sons or daughters have been accused of. And Democratic primary and caucus voters will probably have that more on their minds tonight than they did 2 weeks ago. And that's a problem for Joe Biden.
I'm curious, Lynda, what is your take on that? I mean, is this now an opening on this topic of Ukraine when it comes to Joe Biden that perhaps did not exist before the Hunter Biden interview?
You mean in terms of Donald Trump levying the attacks? I mean, I think that clearly the discussion that we've had just now about the poll numbers shifting in that direction show that there is an opening for him. I mean, I think the other thing that we should be clear about is that the fact that Donald Trump is focusing so much on Joe Biden and has over the many months of this primary is in large part because he's concerned about a matchup with Joe Biden in the general, where, you know, the kind of pull of his policies and his name ID and former standing as vice president would be very powerful in the general election. So if I'm Donald Trump, I'm doing exactly what he's been doing. Continue to bring this up, put my own spin on it, and try to make it seem like whatever happened with Hunter Biden is the exact same thing as what we've all been talking about and what launched this historic impeachment inquiry in the first place.
Caitlin, what's interesting, too, Elaine, is
Go ahead, Caitlin.
Regarding this, is this all comes against the backdrop of Elizabeth Warren on the rise here and actually overtaking Joe Biden in our recent Battleground Tracker poll. And remember, she's been waging a campaign that is very much about, you know, arguing against a rigged system, coming out with an anti-corruption plan, really talking about a government that isn't working for everyone. And now she hasn't gone directly after Biden. And, you know, quite frankly, I'd be surprised if she went there tonight, just given how we've seen other candidates go after Biden to only see it backfire. But there is this sentiment in the Democratic Party right now that shows support for her and that idea. So that's why, even though we're not seeing any of this yet affect Joe Biden's standing in the polls, we are, you know, these questions are going to linger. And we talked to the Trump campaign today, and they want to keep this the focus, especially as the president is under scrutiny.
Lynda, from your perspective, are there viable lines of attack to go after Senator Warren for the other candidates on that stage?
I think the most obvious one is probably on health care. I mean, you've seen several candidates who will be on stage tonight take a chance and make their effort at attacking her on her version or her vision on healthcare, and in particular asking the question, will people experience increases in their taxes in order to fund her plan? And so far she's been able to sidestep that, but I think it's going to be increasingly hard for her to trot out the same talking point that she's used in the past when it comes to things like that.
You know, Major, I wonder, you've had a lot of experience watching primary debates, both Republican and Democratic. What is it that you're going to be looking for? Because the landscape is so vastly different from anything that we've ever seen before politically.
Not only is it different in number, it's different in context, even from the last debate. We haven't talked about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders just had a heart attack. He has got to do something tonight to address that, calm people, re-rally them. He has seen a consistent siphoning off of support in the last 3 months to a very disciplined, organized, and progressive campaign in Elizabeth Warren. I'm also fascinated to see what effect, if any, Tom Steyer has, because if Tom Steyer has a moment tonight, the one thing we know for certain is he has the money to maximize that moment. Oftentimes, other people have had a moment, but they can't fundraise off it. Tom Steyer does not need to fundraise.
Billionaire donor.
He's his own machine. And if he has a moment tonight and can turn that around, perhaps that can be something that is worth watching. I'm also going to keep an eye on Tulsi Gabbard, because she is never boring on this debate stage. She throws a right cross. And I'm not
Syria
sure.
is front and foremost
Syria's a
on
huge
foreign
issue, right?
policy
Now
right now.
she has some complicated history with Assad, and she has some vulnerabilities there. So if she goes really aggressively there, she's got a flank she better protect. But Tulsi Gabbard swings a right cross at these debates and punches up. And I'm going to be curious how she figures out a way either to do that, and if she does, what the ramifications, if any, are.
So, Caitlin, I know you spoke to Andrew Yang's traveling press secretary about how he wants to address this question of impeachment tonight. Let's play a clip from that.
The impeachment inquiry is happening and kind of seems to be overshadowing a lot. How does that kind of factor into the campaign's strategy heading into a night like tonight?
You know, I think ultimately what our campaign and what Andrew's going to be focused on. And unlike the other candidates, Andrew's been the most solution-oriented. Here in Ohio, where 250,000 jobs have been lost in recent years, we really want to connect directly with the folks that have been impacted with that and really focus more towards that and not the distraction of the impeachment. I think, and Andrew would agree with this, every time we talk about Donald Trump, we're losing. We really need to focus on what Americans care about, and that's a stable economy, good jobs, and making sure that they can afford to put food on the table.
So, Caitlin, that's really interesting to hear. Do other campaigns share that view of impeachment as a quote-unquote distraction?
There are mixed views. Certainly, Andrew Yang doesn't want to be focused on that and wants to stick to the issues that really drove him to enter this race and have kind of propelled him to at least raise a decent amount of money. He raised $10 million last quarter, and he's an outsider. He's not in Congress. He isn't, having to deal directly with these issues. I also heard from Cory Booker's campaign that they do want to address impeachment, but they also really want to get back to economic issues, issues around gun safety and other things that the senator wants to talk about, but then contrast that with someone like Kamala Harris, who has been looking for a way to gain momentum in her campaign after falling down in the polls. She's been talking about this message about prosecuting the case against Donald Trump and using her perch in the Senate to make that more clear. So I could imagine someone like her wants to engage this issue and kind of put this, use this as something that gives her some credentials on that point. But I will be curious to see how these lawmakers who are on the stage tonight respond to impeachment. Does someone like Bernie Sanders say that they're ready to convict? He said he supports the inquiry, but does he go further? Do others go further?
I think it's a real test. Right. I mean, impeachment is making massive headlines where we are. Impeachment is dominating the conversation along the East Coast and other big cities. But we're in Ohio. And in Ohio, if you're not talking about the economy, you're not talking to voters at all. And so, Andrew Yang's press secretary makes a really good point that that's where people need to focus. And while impeachment will certainly be on the table tonight, it just can't be the largest portion of what we're talking about.
And the senators have a duty to at least explain, if they're going to render a judgment already, why. You're prejudging the case. That means it's all political, which in a small way is a defensible argument, but it plays into one of the president's talking points. And if not, you should say, I'm not going to say anything about this. Because there are more important issues. The House is dealing with it. We have a process. I'm going to follow that, and I'm going to withhold judgment until such time, if it does come to the Senate, it does. Either way is defensible, politically workable, but you've got to know what you're about and be able to explain it succinctly and with a degree of passion because, as Lynda said, this is a very serious issue. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, said just moments ago, we're deadly serious about this. Well, the more people treat it with an attitude of deadly seriousness, the more the American public might say, oh, you actually are serious about this, and this just isn't another political carnival just on a different day.
So, to follow up, Lynda, on Major's point, how politically perhaps perilous could it be for those senators on that stage tonight as they in particular try to navigate this question of impeachment? Because as Major lays out here, the stakes would seem to be incredibly high. You've got the Democratic primary audience watching this, but at the same time, they could very well be in a position, if it should come to that, as Major notes, to take a vote on this question of impeachment.
Yeah, exactly. And for people watching at home, the Senate will ultimately act as the jury if and when there comes a time when the House passes the articles of impeachment. And so each of these folks that we see on stage tonight will have a very powerful vote or voice in that process if it comes to that. All that said, there's a way you can emphatically describe the perceived lawlessness of this president. There's a way you can describe some of the facts of the matter that we've already seen come to light, whether it's the transcript memo or it's some of the things that President Trump has said up until this point about his exchanges with Ukraine and this whole question of potential quid pro quo. They can talk about it in a way that is measured, that is fact-based, and still raises concerns about where all of these things are leading and what we're hearing leaked from testimony. I mean, some of these things are extraordinarily troubling just on its surface without even getting to the point of being the part of the jury that is going to make an ultimate decision.
All right, Major Garrett, Lynda Tran, and Caitlin Huey-Burns. A lot to watch tonight. Thanks to all of you.